The conflict was far more than merely a war of trenches and artillery. It extended beyond the use of bayonets and barbed wire. The First World War represented a financial battleground as well, fought in gold reserves, on bond markets, within central banks, and in clandestine offices of financiers who never set foot on the battlefield. While soldiers paid the price with their blood, bankers and government officials meticulously calculated their balance sheets. The actions taken during those tumultuous years did not simply determine who emerged victorious or who was defeated. They also reshaped the global financial landscape in ways that continue to reverberate today. If one believes that warfare is solely about politics and military might, it is time for a reassessment. The Great War demonstrated convincingly that money can serve as a weapon, one of the most lethal ever devised. Prominent firms such as J.P. Morgan and Company became instrumental financial allies for both Britain and France during this tumultuous period. They provided substantial loans and managed purchases of weaponry, food supplies, and raw materials on behalf of the Allies. By 1917, when America itself finally entered the conflict, Wall Street had already been financing the Allies' endeavors for several years. This arrangement was far from mere charity. It represented a strategic display of power and influence. American bankers accrued millions through commissions earned during these transactions. As a result of this engagement in warfare finance, the United States emerged from World War I profoundly transformed. It transitioned from being a debtor nation into a creditor powerhouse, shifting from a financial follower to a global leader on the economic stage. This seismic transformation not only changed America's role internationally, but also reshaped its own economic landscape forevermore. If you are curious about how the 20th century transformed into a distinctly American era, the roots of this transformation can be traced back not to battlefields but to the meticulous records in accounting books. France found itself grappling with its own set of challenges, further complicated by the financial burdens of bolstering its defenses and haunted by the lingering memories of the Franco-Prussian War. The nation increasingly relied on loans, both domestic and international, as a lifeline during tumultuous times. French citizens, historically characterized by their frugality and penchant for saving, were persuaded to invest in government bonds. However, a significant portion of the more substantial financing came from across the Atlantic. Just like their British counterparts, the French economy became heavily intertwined with American capital, marking a shift that would influence post-war policies. As debts loomed large over France, their repayment would become a source of considerable tension within society. When discussions arise about the economic turmoil between the wars, it is crucial to recognize that this was not merely about reparations or stock markets. It was also about an overwhelming burden of debt that had amassed during 4 years of relentless conflict. Meanwhile, Russia's financial struggles evolved into a catastrophe of monumental proportions. The vast Russian Empire was marked by underdevelopment and its banking system was frail at best. Although the gold reserves appeared robust on paper, they proved inadequate in practice when faced with mounting military expenses. In order to fund its war efforts, Russia sought extensive loans from allies, particularly from France. Yet as defeats mounted and inflation surged uncontrollably, confidence in the ruble began to plummet dramatically. By 1917, Russia's economy lay in shambles alongside its political landscape. The downfall of the imperial regime was not solely attributable to ideological differences or inept military leadership. Rather, it stemmed from a financial system pushed to its breaking point. Economic miscalculations combined with rampant inflation acted as catalysts for revolution. Once again throughout history, money and power intertwined compellingly. The scale of financial mismanagement during this period was staggering. By war's end, Allied powers had collectively expended more than $140 billion, while Central Powers spent around $60 billion. These figures represented sums unprecedented in global history, vastly exceeding the total pre-war national income of all involved nations combined. The aftermath yielded not only mountains of debt but also marked the collapse of an outdated financial order. The gold standard, which had once served as a foundation for international trust and stability, lay in ruins. Inflation wreaked havoc on economies across Europe. Germany soon faced hyperinflation so extreme that everyday items became astronomically priced. A loaf of bread could cost billions of marks overnight. Ordinary people bore the brunt of these economic upheavals. Workers found their wages eroded, depositors watched their savings vanish before their eyes, and small investors faced ruinous losses. This turbulent period shaped not only individual lives but also redefined nations' futures as they grappled with unprecedented financial realities that would carry lasting implications for generations to come. During tumultuous times, the wealthy elite often took measures to safeguard their fortunes by relocating assets overseas. They invested in tangible goods and maintained proximity to power centers where critical information was first disseminated. The lesson learned was harsh yet unmistakable. In the arena of financial warfare, it is typically the small investors who suffer the most significant losses. By the summer of 1914, Europe was already a powder keg. National rivalries, colonial ambitions, and military alliances had transformed the continent into a chessboard rife with paranoia. Yet beneath all the rhetoric surrounding honor and empire lay a stark financial reality. Conducting a war of such magnitude required unimaginable sums of money. Herein lies the brutal truth. When leaders opted for conflict, they simultaneously chose to embrace debt. This connection remains relevant today. The First World War marked a pivotal moment when governments realized they could finance unimaginable expenditures by detaching currency from reality. They discovered methods to suspend gold standards, print money without restraint, issue bonds to their citizens, and secure foreign loans, ultimately patching up devastation through propaganda and restructuring efforts. Does this sound familiar? This cycle has persisted unbroken throughout history, echoing in every modern crisis, from the Great Depression to the global financial collapse of 2008, each carrying echoes of 1914. When authorities or central banks assert that this situation is temporary, or that the fundamentals are strong, it is essential to remember that they made similar claims back in 1914. Countless individuals placed their faith in these assurances until the currencies they held became nearly worthless. When hostilities finally ceased in 1918, the world resembled a battlefield not only in trenches but also within balance sheets. Before the war, the United States was a debtor nation. However, post-conflict, it emerged as the holder of the largest gold reserves globally and established an unprecedented creditor position. Meanwhile, Europe, the long-standing heart of global finance, found itself drowning in debt. The United Kingdom owed over $4 billion to the United States, France's debts exceeded $3 billion, and even smaller nations faced obligations that seemed insurmountable. The war catalyzed Wall Street's transformation into the new epicenter of global finance, displacing London in a manner no artillery could accomplish. This ushered in an era of American dominance over monetary systems and political influence worldwide. Yet this transition was fraught with challenges. The inherent trap lay in financing wars through debt. Repaying these loans became a conflict unto itself. Desperate to maintain public trust among citizens who had invested in war bonds, Britain and France found themselves compelled to extract reparations from Germany with relentless determination. The Treaty of Versailles stipulated an astronomical repayment figure, 132 billion gold marks, intended to punish and cripple the defeated nation while shifting economic burdens onto its shoulders. However, this demand was nothing short of delusional. Germany simply lacked the capacity to fulfill such obligations. Every attempt made by Germany to meet these reparations, whether through printing more money or attempting to barter goods, only served to destabilize its economy further. The repercussions were profound and far-reaching, laying down a foundation for future turmoil, while illustrating how interconnected financial obligations can lead nations into deeper crises. The hyperinflation of 1923 in Germany, where citizens were seen carting wheelbarrows full of worthless banknotes just to purchase a loaf of bread, was not an isolated incident. It emerged as a direct consequence of a financial system overwhelmed by insurmountable debts that spiraled out of control. This economic turmoil laid the groundwork for anger and resentment, which extremists later exploited to their advantage. At the same time, Britain was striving to restore its financial reputation by re-establishing the gold standard in 1925, pegging the pound to its pre-war value. However, this decision proved to be yet another colossal economic blunder. The British economy had been ravaged during the war. Its industrial base weakened significantly, while debts continued to mount. Attempting to return the pound to its previous parity resembled trying to mend a broken limb without allowing it time to heal properly. The resultant effects included deflation, rising unemployment, and widespread civil unrest. This policy, championed by influential figures like Winston Churchill, is now regarded as one of the most significant financial miscalculations in modern economic history. Once again, it was ordinary workers who bore the brunt of these decisions while elites clung desperately to the illusion of a restored greatness. Across the Atlantic, the United States found itself rich in gold reserves and credit, but faced an entirely different challenge: how to navigate its newfound dominance on the world stage. American banks began channeling funds into Europe, extending loans to Germany so that it could meet reparation payments owed to Britain and France, enabling those nations to settle their debts with American lenders in turn. This elaborate financial carousel appeared stable on the surface but was fundamentally based on circular reasoning. The Dawes Plan of 1924 and the Young Plan of 1929 formalized this flow of money. Rather than generating wealth anew, funds simply circulated within this interconnected web. When the global economy trembled under the weight of the Great Depression, this precarious structure ultimately collapsed. Every empire sending its troops into battle was also steering its populace toward an impending economic burden. Initially, at the onset of this conflict, many governments were optimistic, believing that hostilities would be short-lived, perhaps even concluding by Christmas. They imagined they could finance this endeavor using traditional means, with gold reserves, limited loans, and patriotic donations from their citizens. However, within just weeks, this illusion crumbled. The war consumed funds at an alarming rate that no one had foreseen. Never before had the world been so financially interconnected yet so fragile at the same time. This is why World War I should not merely be viewed as another chapter in military history. It represented a pivotal moment in economic history where financial missteps and delusions reshaped future trajectories. The war demonstrated that governments could abandon gold standards at will, inflate currencies recklessly, and borrow unprecedented sums, all while convincing their citizens that such actions were justified. It revealed that propaganda could transform indebtedness into a form of patriotism, and that everyday investors could be persuaded to part with their wealth for bonds that would never see redemption. Ultimately, it became clear that those who emerged victorious from conflicts were often not the soldiers fighting bravely in trenches, but rather individuals seated around boardroom tables making strategic decisions far removed from battlefields. This stark reality underscores how deeply intertwined warfare and finance can be, and serves as a cautionary tale for future generations about the dangers inherent in economic hubris. The intertwining of money and power has reached a level of closeness that profoundly influences our world to this day. Reflect on your current existence for a moment. Central banks assure us that inflation is merely a temporary occurrence, while governments persistently raise the ceiling on national debt year after year. In an era where new currency can be created with the mere click of a button, it's essential to remember the year 1914. The abandonment of the gold standard was not a mere coincidence. It was a deliberate act born out of desperation. Consider how the borrowing model that sacrifices present stability for future gain, printing money to address current needs, and selling bonds under patriotic banners has been in place for over 100 years. Every financial crisis we have encountered since then can trace its roots back to those tumultuous wartime years, from the stagflation of the 1970s to the mortgage collapse of 2008. The same illusions that governed those times continue to persist today, impacting the lives of ordinary depositors, middle-class workers, and small investors who are still compelled to make sacrifices. The hidden financial struggle behind World War I is far from an archaic relic. Rather, it serves as the foundation for our present reality. The lesson here is harsh yet crucial. When money becomes detached from tangible reality, it transforms into a tool for manipulation. Governments will always discover ways to fund wars, finance relief programs, and manage crises, and they will invariably find mechanisms to make you bear the cost. This burden may manifest as taxes, rising inflation rates, or the gradual erosion of your savings. True wealth cannot be reduced merely to digits displayed on a screen or promises made by politicians. Rather, it encompasses resilience, wisdom, and the ability to see beyond mere illusions. This understanding represents the only genuine financial freedom history has to offer us. As I leave you with this final thought tonight, while history may not repeat itself verbatim, it certainly resonates through time. The financial strategies devised in 1914 have been recycled repeatedly throughout history, cloaked in new language and justifications each time they resurface. Yet despite these superficial changes, the outcome remains consistent. Those in positions of power safeguard their interests, while those lacking knowledge are left vulnerable. If there's one takeaway from this narrative, let it be this. Do not consider money genuine simply because it has been printed. Nor should you regard any system as stable solely based on official assurances. The truth often lies buried within balance sheets, and history serves as an unwavering teacher that does not deceive. If this perspective has opened your eyes in any way, recognize that history holds answers, if we are willing to seek them out diligently. To be precise, during the summer months of 1914, Europe's financial system still revolved around the gold standard. Nations had pledged that their paper currency could be exchanged for real gold, a framework that lent credibility to their currencies while simultaneously constraining governmental actions. Gold reserves were finite resources. Countries could not simply print endless amounts without risking the trust of their people and creditors. At that time, Britain, France, and Germany boasted substantial reserves. However, once millions were mobilized and industries shifted focus to armaments production, expenses skyrocketed beyond imagination. By late 1914, Germany was spending over 10 million marks each day on military endeavors, while Britain's daily military expenditure soon escalated to £2.5 million sterling. The arithmetic was relentless. The available gold dwindled rapidly under such pressures. Consequently, governments found themselves compelled to abandon these stringent financial regulations in order to sustain their war efforts. Desperation led to drastic measures as nations sought innovative ways to secure funding for what had become an unprecedented conflict, a decision that would have long-lasting implications for economies worldwide in the years to come. One by one, the leading nations gradually abandoned the gold standard, quietly acknowledging to their citizens that currency had transformed into little more than a promise, relying solely on faith in the state's stability. This pivotal moment, marked by the dismantling of the gold anchor, emerged as one of the most significant financial shifts in modern history. It revealed just how fragile the so-called real wealth of nations truly was. Money and power were now unshackled from their metallic chains, governed instead by printing presses, credit systems, and public persuasion. Once governments tasted this newfound freedom, there was no turning back to previous constraints. The financial warfare escalated dramatically. For Germany, cut off from global capital markets and blockaded by the Royal Navy, the only recourse lay in domestic borrowing. Berlin launched an extensive campaign to issue bonds, appealing to patriotism while urging ordinary citizens to invest their savings in war loans. The propaganda machine worked tirelessly. Posters depicted heroic soldiers, families were called upon to sacrifice luxuries for their homeland, and constant assurances were given to investors about receiving their money back after victory. In total, Germany managed to gather over 100 billion marks through these efforts. However, this was merely a pyramid built on hope. When defeat eventually arrived, those bonds plummeted in value. Millions of Germans witnessed their savings evaporate into nothingness, and this bitterness became fertile ground for extremism in the years that followed. Economic history always leaves scars behind. In stark contrast to Germany's plight, Britain enjoyed a considerable advantage. London's city stood as the financial epicenter of the world. The pound sterling commanded trust globally, with British networks extending across continents. Initially, the government relied on short-term borrowing through treasury bills and patriotic appeals. However, it soon connected with deeper pools of global credit. A crucial factor in this shift involved reaching out to the United States for support. By 1914, America maintained an official stance of neutrality, but its bankers sensed an opportunity ripe for exploitation.